company is allowed to emit, a certain number of carbon credits.
Oh, sure. Sure.
Took me a while to, understand that as I read it.
Okay. I'm ready to rock.
Yep.
Why don't we start, Tom, by just having you say and spell your name for us, and then that way we can get a good audio level from you.
Which one?
Your full name. So you could say, say your legal first name, and then your last name, and say, but I go by Tom.
Okay. Tell me when you're ready.
You're ready. Go for it.
Gibson L. Stevens, and I go by Tom. Most of my friends don't know who Gibson is.
How do you spell Gibson Stevens?
How do you spell it? Gibson Stevens.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Look good?
Yeah, we're good.
All right. So, Tom, I'm going to pull up some of the questions and stuff that we've gone through, but just to kind of break the ice and get us started, what was it like? Tell me what it was like growing up in Southeast Alaska.
I think it was a great life because unlike kids today are doing video games and all that, you were active because my dad did logging and did fishing and had a boat shop. So you were out doing things all the time, and you had freedom where you could, if we weren't fishing in the wintertime, I could be out rowing around, towing on a log for wood to burn or to split shakes from or something like that. So go clam digging and that. I think it was a great way to be raised.
So why would you be rowing around to find a log? How did you grow up? Were you on a boat? Were you in a float house? How did you grow up?
We at first, when I was real little, my dad had the boat shop at Wolf Creek and 12 Mile Arm in the Castan Bay, and we had the little log house there. But I was real young, and that's where we built the fishing boat. But then after the boat was built, he sold the boathouse, and we moved to Long Island, or Cassan Island. Some people call it Happy Harbor. And we were just on there's two little islands, and we had 3 families that lived there. So I had a little poor rowboat that, my dad had a beautiful rowboat, but I didn't row it very much because the other boat was mine. It was like a piece of pie. It was a terrible thing to row, and it leaked. And matter of fact, I always carried a deal of cork and cotton and a cork and iron and a hammer, because I'd be rowing along and a seam would pop up and I'd start sinking, so I'd row for shore and pull it up and flip it over and cork it and put it back in the water and go again. So it was neat to go out, and I knew that my dad liked a good log. I knew what to look for a good shake log. And so if I saw a good fire log or anything in the morning, I always carried a staple or a dog with me and a piece of buoy line and a hammer. I need the hammer for the corking anyway. And you just find a log and drive a dog in it and put the buoy line on it and start rowing for home, And high tide, you put it up, and maybe the next day you'd be bucking it up for firewood. So it was fun, and it was rewarding and neat, I thought.
Can you stop a sec? Yeah. Do you mind if we take your phone out of your pocket?
Yeah.
Yeah. There you go. And
matter of fact, turn it off. Otherwise, that thing just might go off. It's all we need in the middle of everything.
Put mine on airplane mode too.
Thank you.
You don't think about stuff like that. I'm just gonna turn it off.
You got one of those big ones.
Big ones. Size matters.
Yeah. I'm just gonna fix your bolo tie too.
Oh, yeah, go Wakianis.
There you go. Otherwise, everything's perfect. So, thank you.
Like I say, you can't make a silk purse out of a sow's ear.
I think we're doing okay. Go ahead, Mickey.
All right. So you were talking about growing up in Southeast. You were rowing around a lot. How old were you when you were out? And you were by yourself, right?
Yeah, I was probably 8 or 9, maybe. And you didn't have life jackets. My theory always was, I never learned how to swim, but you don't have to learn how to swim. You should be in the boat, not in the water. So, why do you need to swim,
So how much time did you spend on boats as a young person?
Well, when we lived in Long Island, we were in the float house, which was actually on land. My dad put it up at a really high tide and we made a flat spot for it. So even though it was a float house, it really didn't float. And in the summertime, we fished all the time. So it was a good portion of the time we were living on the boat and working as trolling. And then in the wintertime, whenever I get a chance, I'd be out rowing around. So a lot of time.
So is that how you got into model boats?
The model boats came, I was maybe 10 years old. We had a friend that fished with us near us, and his son was John Sandgrant, and he carved beautiful little models. And I thought, boy, that's neat. I really admired his little fishing boats that he carved. So when I was little, I carved just about anything. If I saw something or other, I'd just make another one like it. A little fishing pole, rod and reel, and whatever. So I was always whittling. Recently, I went to a senior citizen carving class, they called it. And I went and I said, well, I'm going to be mostly visiting, and I'm not a carver, I'm a whittler. It's kind of the difference between a fiddler and a violinist. If I need something or other, a little thing, I just carve it out, and that's easy to do. But to carve a intricate thing doesn't have any interest to me, to make a formal carving of some kind.
So when you saw this boat, it inspired you. How did it inspire you? The model boat.
How did it inspire me? I guess because I saw him with his boats, and you whittled them out, and I knew I had the ability to do it. So I said I'll just try to start whittling away on cedar that I'd find, and I enjoyed just sitting whittling, So then later on, my dad thought it'd always be, he was a shipwright, and he always thought it'd be neat to build a model boat, a scale model boat. So the troller that I have, all the planks are spiled, and the oak ribs are seamed and nailed and clinched. And he built that, but he found it was more work than he ever thought it was going to be, because he could lay one plank a day on a 40-foot troller, and on the model he could lay 2 planks. So it took a lot of time to build the model correctly. And the reason for that is, you think about it, if you're working on a real boat, if you're off a 32nd of an inch, that's not bad. On a model, if you're off a 32nd of an inch, that's just terrible. So you have to use the same principles, but everything has to be more precise. You don't have any room for error. So that's the neat part about a model, that you really got to pay attention.
Well, tell me about your first model.
My first model, it's hard to remember which came first. I had one that some friends bought a kit for me, and I've got it here now, and it's all broken up. I was going to fix it, but never did. That was probably in about 57. But I was always whittling on stuff. But I made a small model in about 58 that I carved, just about that big, a little troller, solid, and those were just the static models. But after my dad started on that troller, he willed it to me, and I had it for several years, and I started practicing for working on that, because I didn't want to work on the troller until my skill level was as good as his was for building it. I didn't want to, have lesser quality on it than the original boat was. So I bought some dollhouse kits and built dollhouses and learned how to find things and have scale. So you have to see scale to make things right. Otherwise, the proportions are wrong and it doesn't look good, doesn't look real. So I worked on the troller and got it finished, and then I bought this big boat you see behind me at a hobby show, and it was not finished. So I worked on that, and then it just kind of grew. It's kind of like an obsession.
Well, what are special about some of the boats that people are going to see on display? Talk about like the Seiner and the Humdurgan and the Tug and the Fish Buyer.
What I like in model boats is showing something that people will look at that have been around and they see it and it looks real enough for them that it brings back memories. Like I go to shows and people will say on my tug sometimes you could just like you could walk on the decks, they say, and that's what you strive for, is that sometimes they're not really precise scale, but they have a look, as you know, in artistry, that sometimes it isn't real. You change things a little bit to give the perspective you want. And what I like is seasoning in that, so it has depth in it, and when you look at it, it looks real. And the Seiner, that was really probably my favorite boat, because when it was fully remote controlled, it had a bow thruster in it, and I could remotely launch a skiff, as people can see in the video that we have of it. And then the skiff, when you launch it, tows from the bow, and then I figured out how to remotely change it to a stern tow. So what I liked about modeling when I really got into it was figuring how to accomplish something that I thought somebody else maybe hadn't done, which really isn't real, because there's somebody someplace in the world that has done it way before you and maybe better. But if no one that locally has done it, then people think you're the first at it. So I like the Percenter because it looks real. It lays out a net nice, and it's just a fun boat.
What about some of the log boats and talk about the logging boats in the Southeast?
The log tug, which is I think behind me there. My dad had a logging camp, so I was around logging, but a different style. That was what they call jippo logging, and that's just where somebody has a donkey and an A-frame for a gel poke, and they go up against the shore and they anchor out the other end and they yard logs to the shore. Whereas in a real logging camp, they typically have cats and a towing arch, and they might have a high line yarder and that, cold deck in it and so forth. But they'll usually be down in the water. They'll be like a small tug, a log tug that's moving around into booms and that, And so I did my log tug fashioned after that. It has teeth on the bow, so you can actually move little logs around quite well with it. And the Humdurgan is something that is perhaps a terminology only here in Alaska, I'm not sure. But they were usually a small workboat, and a lot of times they were with a little trunk cabin on them. And maybe the supervisor or the guy over the logging camp, he would run around and see how things are going with it, and maybe he'd bring you some gas or whatever you needed, and it was just kind of a little workboat.
And then talk about the Fish Buyer and how that was important to you and how you came up with that.
The Fish Buyer, I got the model, and it was a North Seas trawler. And since that didn't really relate to anything around here too much, I went, I think I can make a Fish Buyer, because Fish Buyers are oftentimes made from something else. You know, you decide you want to go out and haul fish, so you buy a boat that'll work, and you put all the gear on it, the pumps and all that. And I hadn't been around any fish buyers, so I wasn't quite familiar with the pumps and all that. So I went down to the Fisherman's Wharf and looked at some and saw how the pumps were and that. A friend of mine's finishing that up now with all the pumps on it. And I just thought it would go nicely when I went out to commercial shows, like at the Seattle, what do they call it? They have a deal in the fall, Fall Fisherman's Festival. And when you go there, you're at the Fisherman's Wharf and Fisherman's Terminal, and you have a lot of commercial fishermen that come and people understand what they're looking at. You know, the common questions you get asked when you're a model boater when you go to a show is, how much does it cost? How fast does it go? How long does it take you to build? You know, whereas when the commercial guys come, they look at it and they'll say they worked on it or whatever. They'll ask questions that are really good questions, you know, or comments on it. They'll be knowledgeable of your model, really, if you have one that depicts a working boat, a full-size boat. Some of mine don't represent a real full-size boat, my own concept of a model. But if you have one like I had the Claudia Foss, and I have it on display, and people say, "Oh, I worked on the Claudia," and that, you know, and then they know if it's right or not because they were on it, and they'll go, "Oh yeah, this is real accurate."
What do you want to pass on to the people who see your models?
My idea of the models is to capture a moment in time that now or in the future people are going to look at it and say, "Oh, that's what they did back then." You know, like in Everett, they have a boat. They spent $500,000 on this wreck of a thing that's just a hull, and the stern's fallen off it. Now it's in a building, and nobody stops and looks at it. But if someone had built a model of that boat that was accurate, it could have been on display in a little building, and people could look at it, and they could have pictures behind it, and people would get an idea what happened back then, what the boat did, and how it looked and how it operated. And that's my idea, is that when I'm long gone, that these people will see at an era of time how the boats looked and perhaps what they did. And I think that's important.
Can you tell me how life has changed in Southeast from when you were young to today? And
well, as you know, you live in Juneau, and before you go to downtown, you look in the newspaper and find out how many cruise ships are in, and you find that 5 cruise ships are in, that you know that if you go downtown, you're going to be stuck there like a herd of cattle and just kind of flow with it till you hope you get to where you want to go. In the old days, it was quite different, you know. I liked it because your word was important, your character. My dad could buy things on handshake, and I saw that happen. And an example of how people's life trickles down and affects other people. My father was well known and was an honorable person, so I went up to work on a trawler to rebuild the engine in it, and I needed some tools, and I knew this machine shop. I used to go in as a kid with my dad, and I went in and I says, "I'm Israel Stevenson. I am rebuilding an engine at Bar Harbor, and I need a such and such, and is there any chance I could borrow that?" And he says, "If you're Israel Stevenson, you can borrow anything you want." So you can only hope that you live such that people after you, that your name is good for something like that, where someone says, if you're such and such a son, whatever you need is good, because they feel that you're probably a good part of that.
That's excellent. I like that a lot. What have I missed? What else do you want to say that you haven't already said?
No, I can't think of much of anything. I just hope that that these models that you got from me will be displayed someplace where a lot of people will appreciate them and enjoy them. And it's really neat when you have a hobby like this, because you can create something that other people will be able to enjoy. It's nice to do something that you enjoy, but if it just sits in, like most of these boats have gone out and display at different shows, but for the majority of the time they sit here in the rec room and nobody sees them. And to me, that's kind of a shame when you have something that's what people enjoy, whereas you're going to make that possible for them, or you're going to put them out where thousands of people will see them through the years and go, oh, that's interesting, you know. I think I don't consider myself as being the important part of the whole thing. The important part is the model and what it depicts and what it'll do for people.
Morgan, you have any questions you want to ask?
No, I think we're good.
Louis, what do you think? Any questions I missed? Anything we should talk about?
No, I think it was well covered.
Okay.
The only thing that applied to me is what he said last, in regard to, like I do Northwest Indian carvings, and most are in the house or has the family. They've been on display a couple of times, but not very many people will see them. But a lot of people can relate to them. Just like Tommy said, all of these boats I used to work with Claudia Foss. Mm-hmm. And just to look at that, and the whole thing is about triggering a memory, yeah, and keeping the memories alive. That's what Tom's doing, keeping lots of memories alive.
Speaking of that, I have one last question for you. You know, keeping the memory alive and people coming to visit Southeast Alaska and they see a lot of different stuff. How have boats, in your opinion, shaped Southeast and the activity and the commerce that has happened in Southeast Alaska?
Well, as you know, that if you like live in Ketchikan or Juneau, you're not gonna drive there, because that car's gonna have to be shipped there. So a container ship has to bring that car there, or you drive it up and put it on a ferry. Like where Louis and I was raised, you either got there by boat or you got there by seaplane. You didn't get there by car. You can today by a ferry. You can catch the Hollis and drive all the way around to Timbuktu, I guess, and end up back in Kasan. But back in the old days, you had to get there by boat or seaplane. So, you know, the boats were important because they towed logs, you know, that made that logging industry. You had to get the logs to mill. You had to have the fishing boats to catch the fish, and boats in Southeast are just a vital part of the whole equation, because it's either boat or plane.
I ask a question.
What do you think?
Maybe you could talk about, and you could just look at McHugh, at just how within the seiner represents fishing, and then you have the logging business and the tugboat. How have Clinkets played a role in those industries throughout the years?
Great question.
That's a good question. You see, the thing with me is, I don't think of, you know, like Louis Haida and I'm part Tlingit. You know, some people are real caught up in what nationality you are or whatever. My dad was English. My mother said of me, she says, "You're a damn poor Indian." Because I look at you as a person. I don't care that your relatives were this or that. I look at you as either a good person, a moderate person, or a poor person. So I didn't think of what nationality somebody was when they did this or that, or I just think of people as doing a good job, or being a good person, and like where I was raised in Kasan, their height is there, but I didn't think of myself as being anything different because I was Tlingit. Matter of fact, the lady that passed away a few years ago, and we were friends when we were little kids, I mentioned something about I was Tlingit, and she goes, I didn't know you were Tlingit. I thought you were Haida. So, and a funny part of nationality and that is we used to go through from Friday Harbor to Ketchikan with a trawler each year, and we'd stop in Alert Bay because my dad liked to buy marmalade there. And they had there was a native primarily there, and they were really, really mean. And I told my dad, I don't want to stop in Alert Bay, and he says, why is that? He says, because there's a bunch of Indians there. and I remember my brother and I, my half brother, were playing something like that, and we're playing cowboys and Indians, and we used to argue over who had to be the Indian.
So, from a different perspective, you know, Tlingit, Haida, culture, knowledge, history of the region influenced what happened, right? I mean, influenced voting, influenced other things. How did you see that play?
I don't quite understand what you mean.
Well, so there had to be like local history, right? That the Tlingits knew that the newcomers didn't know. And so how did that influence the way things were done? And how did the culture influence the development?
That's a good question. I wish I don't have a good answer. You know, I think of, you talk about the people that were influential in things. Louis's dad, I think it was, Louis Jones, he built boats, and the old boats back in that day had a canvas bridge on them, and they had a pipe railing around it, and they were really poor looking. But his was it your dad or your granddad, the shipwright?
Grandfather.
Your grandfather, yeah. He invented the bridge that had the nice slope in it like they do now. He was way ahead of his time. And some people that aren't aware think that if you live out in the middle of nowhere, you know, I think that our concept of Alaskans has really been trampled on by the reality shows, you know, like the Bush people and that, because people had to be smart to live out in a remote area, because you had to be a fireman and your doctor and your all those things. You had to fix things, keep things going, and utilize what you had. And you know, when you live in the city, if something breaks, you just go to somebody and get it fixed. You buy a part and everything. But living in a remote area, you have to use your head to do well, and to meet with all these people that had all of these skills that could build boats and so on. These weren't dumb people. They were very intelligent people, even though they weren't in a highly populated area. There was a lady that lived in a little island where I did, and she moved in later, and her name was Boots, and she was a different person. She ordered the Wall Street Journal, and they brought a tour fluid out whenever they came out. And you could talk to her, and she was knowledgeable about any current event because she had read everything. And my attorney friend that went out with me, he was amazed that here's this person that lives out in this little island in the middle of nowhere, was probably more informed about current events and things than people that might live in a highly populated area. And our neighbor that was on the island, he became a physicist. So don't think that people that are from a remote area or a small area are lacking anything. I think that sometimes that person has to really be thinking to, and that he has life to think about rather than sometimes we get captured by today video games and stuff like that, and you don't think for yourself. And I think that people that are from, like in Southeast Alaska, which is primarily small places, there's a lot of brilliant people come from those places just because of their surroundings. If that makes any sense.
That's great. Morgan, anything else?
Well, on the question I was asking, I was interested in the Tlinkit's role in the. Do you think when you said it captures a moment in time, do you think some of these moments you've captured are no longer the way they are, as fishing and the logging and just reliance on the marine highways? Have you seen that change in your lifetime?
Well, to me, it seemed really strange to be sitting in Kazan Island, where I used to row around, and I looked out and there's a ferry going past. I mean, I was like, that shouldn't be there. That's really weird. And I went to Kazan, and there was a school. There's all kinds of computers sitting there. You can go over and use a phone, and because those things weren't even, dreamt of back then. And then by the same token, you can look at like Kazan. My mother worked there in the summer sometimes, and you could go there at midnight. I remember my dad and I running for Kazan, and we could see all the lights of the cannery going because it ran 24/7. And there was the Chinese crew and the Filipino crew, and there was all the big bunkhouses, and there was the place to eat and the store. And it was just thriving, and today we don't have much activity there. So it's strange to have lived long enough to seen some of these places that were thriving canneries that are little now, are like Waterfall Cannery. My dad was port engineer. For years it was just that dormant. There's just a watchman there, and today there's a resort there. The Stevens Ranch that my father's parents started, it was just a little homestead place that they lived on, and now they got a little resort type of thing there, I guess. So it's interesting to see that some of the changes, some of it's good, and some of it's bad, as far as, like we logged so much of the area, and it was neat for what it did for people, but it's sad to look up there and see all that bald side will come back because it's all seeded, The good thing was that like they left all the timber around the edges, so if you're going around by water it looks fine, but if you walk in or go fly over it, it's like looks like an old man's head is bald in the middle, because they logged all the trees off. So, going to these places, you can remember the old times when the canneries were thriving and there were logging camps all over the place, and now you don't see that. So that part's different, and I'm not sure which is best. I think the old ways, when I was raised, was better for a child than it is a kid that's raised today with all electronics. I think the problem with electronics in that is you don't learn to interface with people. You're just keying to somebody, and I think that's really important part of your life if you want to succeed, is to be able to interface with people. I think that's probably one of the most important things you can do. You can do wonderful things by yourself, but unless you share it with somebody or whoever, you just really need to interface. What was that? I don't have anything that does
What
that.
time is it?
It's